Before we begin tonight's story, tell me where you're watching from. I used to think graveyards were quiet places, peaceful even. But Pine Hollow Cemetery isn't like that. The ground here remembers every name, every shovel, every keeper who ever thought they could leave. So if you ever find yourself driving down County Road 14 and you see a light through the trees, don't stop. That's not a cemetery. That's Pine Hollow calling. It was supposed to be a quiet gig. That's what I told myself the morning the county called. After years of bouncing between construction jobs, pouring concrete in the summer heat, and scraping frost off steel in the winter, I thought I'd earned a break. My back was done, my knees were done, and frankly, I was just tired of people. Grave digging sounded peaceful. When the woman from the county office said night shift, Pine Hollow Cemetery, Northern Florida, I didn't even hesitate. I figured, how bad could it be? I've worked tougher jobs in worse places. Besides, the dead don't complain. She told me the pay was steady, the hours long, and the last guy didn't last. I thought she meant he quit. Pine Hollow wasn't on any map I could find. You drive 2 hours past Gainesville, take a left where the road loses its lines, and just keep going until the world goes quiet. No streetlights, no gas stations, just pine trees on both sides, thick as walls. The sign came out of nowhere, hand-painted, half-rotted. Pine Hollow Cemetery, Est 1878. There wasn't much to it. A rust-eaten iron gate, a crooked fence line, and a dirt path that disappeared into the trees. The kind of place you'd drive past without noticing, unless you were looking for it. And me? I was looking for it. The first thing that hit me when I stepped out of the truck was the smell. Not decay, not yet. It was the smell of wet soil and stagnant water, like the earth itself hadn't taken a deep breath in 100 years. The air was so heavy it felt like it was pressing down on me, the way humid nights in Florida always do. The silence out there was different too. It wasn't peaceful. It was waiting. You know that kind of stillness that makes your ears ring because there's nothing else to hear. That's Pine Hollow. The office turned out to be a small tin-roofed shed at the edge of the property. No computer, no paperwork, just a rusted clock, a single bulb, and a wooden table with a dent the size of a skull in it. On the wall hung a faded photograph of some old caretaker from the 1940s, shovel in hand, standing next to an open grave. His eyes were the kind that made you feel like he was still watching. There was a thermos on the table too, still warm. That was my first red flag, but I told myself someone probably left it from the day shift. The county said a man named Clyde would meet me out there. I waited almost an hour before he showed up, headlights cutting through the mist, a pickup older than I was rattling up the path. When he stepped out, I realized he looked exactly how I pictured a gravedigger would look. Tall, wiry, with skin like leather and eyes sunk deep behind dark circles. He didn't say much, just handed me a notebook, dog-eared and held together with black tape. "Read this before sundown," he said. His voice was low, gravelly, the kind that comes from too many cigarettes and too many years spent alone. I chuckled and asked, "What's in it? Maintenance schedule? Plot records?" He looked at me like I'd just said something stupid. "Those are the rules," he said. "Follow them. You'll last longer than I did." Before I could ask what that meant, he climbed back into his truck. Didn't shake my hand, didn't even look back. Just said one last thing through the open window. "Don't let the lamps go out, no matter what you hear." And then he drove off, taillights vanishing into the swamp mist. I stood there alone, the sound of his engine fading into nothing. Just me, the shed, and a line of gravestones stretching out under a bruised purple sky. The air felt thicker by the minute. The frogs had gone silent. Even the crickets had stopped. I opened the notebook under the dim porch light, half expecting work notes or payroll forms. Instead, the first page said, "The rules of Pine Hollow Cemetery, night shift only. Always clock in before sundown. Keep the lanterns lit. All 6 of them. If you hear digging when you're not digging, don't go look. Never speak to anyone standing beyond the fence after midnight. Lock the gate before dawn, even if you have to leave someone behind. At first, I laughed. Thought Clyde was just playing with the new guy, but that laugh didn't last long. Because as I read the last line, I heard something move behind the shed. Slow, deliberate, like a boot dragging through gravel. And when I turned around, every lantern in that cemetery flickered. Once. You ever drive so far out into nowhere that your radio gives up before you do? That's what it felt like heading to Pine Hollow. 20 miles past the last gas station, the asphalt just gave up. Cracked, faded, and turned into a dirt road that rattled my teeth. The kind of road that doesn't care if you're lost, because it assumes you already are. The farther I drove, the less the world looked like Florida. The air got heavier, the trees taller. Spanish moss dangled low, sweeping the windshield like fingers tracing glass. Every few miles, I'd pass a wooden cross buried in the ditch. No names, just weathered paint and wilted flowers. I remember thinking, someone dies out here, and no one even bothers taking the cross down. By the time I reached the gate, the sun was gone. The cemetery looked like it had been forgotten on purpose. A rusted archway leaned sideways, and a wooden sign, barely legible, read, Pine Hollow Cemetery, Est 1878. The paint had peeled away so badly it looked like something had clawed at it. The humidity wrapped around me the moment I stepped out of the truck, the kind that clings to your clothes and skin, where the air feels alive, thick enough to breathe back. The smell was a mix of wet soil and something faintly metallic. There was no office, no lights, just a tin-roofed shed sitting at the edge of the property, its porch sagging under the weight of years. And there, sitting on an old rocking chair, was a man. He looked like he'd been carved out of the same earth he worked in. Lean, wiry, gray hair slicked back with sweat. His skin was the color of tobacco, and his clothes looked decades old. Denim overalls, mud-caked boots, and a miner's headlamp that buzzed faintly even though the bulb flickered like it wanted to die. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just sat there, rocking slow, hands resting on a walking stick that looked more like a broken shovel handle. "You the new keeper?" he asked. His voice came out rough, like gravel rolling through a pipe. "Guess that's me," I said, trying to sound casual. "Clyde, right?" He nodded once. "County sends me folks every few years. Don't stick around long." I laughed. Because what else do you do when a stranger says something like that in the middle of a cemetery? But he didn't laugh back. He just kept rocking, that headlamp beam cutting lazy circles through the dark. He pointed to the shed. "Your tools are inside, lanterns too. Keep 'em full, keep 'em burning. There's 6 in total, 1 at each corner and 1 by the gate. Don't forget none of 'em." I started to ask why, but he cut me off. "Don't matter why, just do it." The way he said it, flat, tired, final, made me swallow whatever joke I had ready. Then he stood up, slow, like his joints were older than the earth. Walked over to the porch rail and pulled a small black notebook from his back pocket, wrapped in electrical tape, the corners bent and dirty. "Here," he said. "This'll keep you alive longer than luck will." I took it. The thing felt heavy for its size, like the kind of book that had seen too much. "What's in it?" I asked. "The rules," he said. "Read 'em before sundown. Every word. Some of it won't make sense right away, but you'll understand soon enough." There was a pause. That kind of pause where you can hear the world breathing. The crickets stopped. The wind stopped. Even the trees seemed to lean in closer. Then Clyde said, "I stayed too long here once. Place remembers things. You'll see." He started toward his truck, boots crunching through the gravel, and just before he climbed in, he turned and looked at me one last time. "You'll hear digging sometimes. Don't go looking for it." Then he was gone, tail lights fading into the black, swallowed by the trees. I stood there on that porch, notebook in hand, watching the fog start to roll in through the gates. For a minute, I thought about calling the county back and telling them they'd hired the wrong guy. But the night was already swallowing the road, and my phone had zero signal. So I did what I always do. I got to work. I opened the shed, flicked on my flashlight, and saw the first lantern sitting on the table. Its glass was cracked, soot-stained, but still holding a little flame, and pinned to the wall above it in neat handwriting were the words, "Keep them lit." I didn't know it yet, but that was my real job from that night forward. Not digging, not mowing, not cleaning, just keeping the light burning. For them. When Clyde handed me that notebook, I thought it was just some kind of maintenance log. A list of tools, supply orders, burial plots, maybe the schedule for mowing. You know, normal cemetery stuff. But the way he looked at me, that wasn't a man handing off paperwork. That was a man passing down a warning. "Don't lose it," he said, his fingers gripping the edge of the book like it might bite. "Those are the rules." His eyes didn't blink, didn't shift, just stared at me long enough that I felt something cold crawl up my back. I laughed a little, trying to break the tension. "What, like a rule book for digging holes?" He didn't laugh, not even a crack of a smile. "Read 'em before sundown," he said. "You break even one, you'll regret it." Then he turned and walked off toward that rusted pickup, his boots crunching through gravel like distant thunder. By the time I thought of something to say, anything, the sound of his truck was already gone, swallowed by the trees. I stood there a minute, just holding that notebook. It was smaller than my hand, covered in black electrical tape to keep it from falling apart. The edges were soft, pages yellowed, water-stained, the kind of thing that had been through a few too many summers. I opened it under the light of my headlamp. The first page smelled like damp paper and old oil. In the corner, scrawled in pencil, were 5 words. "For the next poor bastard." Right below that, written in neat block letters, was the title, "The Rules of Pine Hollow Cemetery. Night shift only." I frowned. Night shift only. What was so special about the night? I flipped to the next page, and there they were. A list written in 2 different handwritings, like generations had added to it over time. Always clock in before sundown. Keep the lanterns lit, all 6 of them. If you hear digging when you're not digging, don't go look. Never, ever speak to anyone standing beyond the fence after midnight. Lock the gate before dawn, even if you have to leave someone behind. I chuckled under my breath. Some small-town hazing tradition, I thought. Every workplace has its inside jokes, right? Hospitals, fire stations, even graveyards. But this felt different. The handwriting on the first few rules looked old, like something written with a fountain pen. But the last line, Rule No. 5, was written darker, fresher, and pressed hard enough to dent the paper beneath it. It wasn't a joke. It was a warning. As I stood there flipping through, I noticed more scribbles in the margins. Short notes, half-erased names. Little things that didn't make sense at first. Lantern went out again. Fence line whispering, check lock. Clyde saw her near the gate. That last one, saw her near the gate, made my throat go dry. I looked up from the notebook toward the fence line, just to prove to myself I wasn't spooked. Nothing there. Just the same crooked crosses, the same leaning stones. But the air, it had changed. The breeze that had been pushing the Spanish moss gently just stopped, dead still. Even the insects went quiet, like the whole place was holding its breath. I told myself it was just nerves, first-night jitters. So I tucked the notebook into my jacket pocket and got back to unpacking the shed. There wasn't much inside. A few rusted shovels, 2 bottles of kerosene, and a row of old lanterns, each one numbered with flaking white paint. I figured I'd fill them later. But something about Clyde's tone stuck in my head. Keep 'em burning. I didn't understand why it mattered. Light was light, right? Still, I found myself refilling every lantern before sunset, one by one. As I worked, I noticed something odd. The glass on lantern number 3, the one that hung closest to the back fence, had fingerprints on the inside. Small ones. Too small to belong to any grown man. I wiped them clean and told myself it was just dirt. By the time the sky started bleeding orange, I was sweating through my shirt. The last bit of daylight hit the gravestones like gold, casting long shadows that stretched across the grass. I took the notebook out again, reading that first line one more time. Always clock in before sundown. The sun was barely hanging on, just a sliver above the tree line. So I walked over to the old punch clock nailed to the shed wall, slid the card in, and pulled the lever down. The click echoed through the whole cemetery, sharp, metallic, final. And as soon as it did, I swear the air around me changed. The night didn't fall gradually like it usually does. It dropped. 1 second, there was light, and the next, nothing but darkness and the faint hiss of the lanterns. I glanced at the notebook one last time before heading to the gate. On the back page, written in red ink, was something Clyde must have added himself. If you start hearing voices, don't answer. They don't know they're dead yet. The words didn't sink in until much later. But that was the moment, right there, standing alone under the dying light, that I realized Pine Hollow wasn't just a place where people rested. It was a place that listened. And that notebook? It wasn't just a guide. It was a survival manual. I sat inside that shed for a long while, just staring at the notebook. The rain had started again, not hard, just a steady Florida drizzle. The kind that sounds like fingers tapping on tin. It mixed with the buzz of the single bulb hanging over my head, making the whole place feel smaller. I flipped open the book, careful not to tear the pages. They were yellowed, brittle, and smeared with what looked like old mud, or something darker. Some of the fingerprints were pressed so deep they'd left ridges, like whoever held it last had been gripping it for dear life. And there it was again, the title written across the top in block letters. The Rules of Pine Hollow Cemetery, Night Shift Only. Beneath that, the list that started it all. Always clock in before sundown. Keep the lanterns lit, all 6 of them. If you hear digging when you're not digging, don't go look. Never, ever speak to anyone standing beyond the fence after midnight. Lock the gate before dawn, even if you have to leave someone behind. I read them once, twice, then closed the book and laughed under my breath. Local superstitions. Florida's full of them. I grew up in the Panhandle. Small towns, old churches, cemeteries older than the state itself. Every place like this has its ghost stories. Don't whistle after dark, my grandmother used to say. Don't point at a grave, or they'll point back. So yeah, when I saw those rules, I figured it was just the same kind of thing. Folklore for the night crew. Still, something about the way Clyde said, "You'll regret it," wouldn't leave me. So I kept reading. In the margins, someone had written notes next to a few of the rules. Tiny handwriting, shaky. Maybe Clyde's, maybe someone before him. Next to rule number 2, it said, "They don't like the dark. The dark belongs to them." And beside rule number 4, written in faded red ink, "Even if it looks like someone you know, don't speak. They learn your voice." I stared at that one for a while. The rain kept tapping on the roof like it was trying to say something. Around 9, I stepped outside to stretch my legs. The air had gone thick. Fog curling through the grave rose like smoke. The lanterns glowed faintly in the mist, each one swaying just enough to make you think someone was walking by. I checked each one carefully because part of me, the sensible part, said it was good maintenance practice. But the other part, the part that remembered Clyde's voice, said it was survival. When I reached the 3rd lantern, the one near the oldest graves, I saw something that made me stop cold. There was a small pile of dirt beside one of the stones, fresh dirt, and on top of it, a shovel, my shovel. Thing is, I hadn't been digging. I picked it up, the metal cold against my hand, and looked around. Nothing. No footprints, no signs of movement. Just fog and silence. I told myself it was just leftover from the day crew. Maybe they'd forgotten to lock up. Maybe they'd missed a grave refill. But the shed door was locked when I got there. That shovel shouldn't have been outside. I leaned it against the nearest headstone, trying to ignore the strange feeling creeping up my neck. The one that said I wasn't as alone as I thought. And when I turned back toward the shed, I noticed something I swear hadn't been there before. The notebook was sitting on the porch railing, open, page fluttering, the ink shining wet in the lantern light. A new line had appeared beneath the fifth rule. Handwriting rough, scrawled, still glistening like the ink hadn't dried yet. Rule number 6. If you find the shovel where you didn't leave it, stop digging. It's already been claimed. Now, I know what you're thinking. Maybe I wrote it myself and forgot. Maybe the pages just stuck together and I missed that rule the first time. That's what I told myself too. But the problem is, I hadn't opened that page since I walked out of the shed. And when I picked the notebook up, it was warm, like it had been held by someone else. The rest of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the rules weren't about tradition. They weren't warnings for the living. They were instructions for keeping the dead in line. Every graveyard has its rhythm, the wind, the creak of trees, the hum of insects. But that night, Pine Hollow's rhythm felt off, like the ground itself was breathing, slow and deep, under my boots. When I went back into the shed, I laid the notebook on the table, trying not to look at it. But just before I blew out the lantern and turned in for the night, my eyes drifted to the last line again. Lock the gate before dawn, even if you have to leave someone behind. At the time, I still thought it meant trespassers. Now, I know better. It doesn't mean leaving the living out. It means not letting the dead back in. Sun dropped faster than it should have that evening. One moment the world was gold and hazy, and the next, it was like somebody pulled a curtain across the sky. Florida nights do that sometimes. They don't ease you into dark. They drop it on you, heavy and wet. The air went still. Even the frogs, loud, relentless things that usually scream all night, fell quiet all at once. It was so sudden it felt wrong, like the whole swamp was holding its breath. That's when I knew this place had its own rhythm, and I was stepping into it. I started with the lanterns, just like Clyde told me to. There were 6 in total, 1 at each corner of the cemetery, 1 by the shed, and 1 by the main gate. Each one was old, heavy, and covered in soot. The glass warped with age, the metal frames rusted to a reddish-brown crust. But when I lit the first wick, the light came alive like it had been waiting for me. That flame didn't flicker like normal fire. It swayed slow, like it was breathing. And when I stepped back, the fog seemed to pull away from it, almost respectfully. I made my way around the property, 1 lantern at a time, the soft glow barely cutting through the mist that rolled in from the bayou. By the time I lit the last one, the air felt different, thicker, charged, like something had been watching me and finally decided to settle down. The shed became my base that night. Tin walls, 1 chair, a thermos of black coffee, and that notebook lying open on the table beside me. The smell of kerosene mixed with damp wood and old dirt. It wasn't pleasant, but it was familiar. The kind of smell you learn to live with when you work the night shift. By 10 o'clock, I'd started getting used to the quiet. It wasn't peaceful, not really. But it was steady, and steady's good when you're alone in a place like that. That's when I heard it. 3 slow strikes. Metal on dirt. Thud, thud, thud. Then nothing. I froze. You know how certain sounds don't belong in certain hours? Like hearing a baby cry in a factory or a door slam in an empty building. That's what it was like. Wrong place, wrong time. It came from the far corner, somewhere near the back fence line, where the oldest graves sat, the ones half swallowed by moss and time. At first, I thought it was an echo. Maybe a branch falling, maybe the sound bouncing off the shed. But then it came again. 3 more. Thud, thud, Thud. The exact same rhythm. Slow, patient, human. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The beam caught nothing but mist and gravestones. The fog was so thick it swallowed the light like smoke. I called out, just once, "Hello?" The word died fast. No echo, no answer. Just quiet. Then something moved. A shadow between the lanterns, just for a split second. Could have been a trick of the fog. Could have been my nerves. But I swear I saw a figure standing still between two headstones. And then it was gone. Back inside the shed, I tried to laugh it off. Told myself it was just the swamp playing tricks. Humidity can carry sound weird, make it bounce in ways that don't make sense. That's what I told myself. But when I sat down, the notebook was open again, a different page this time. It wasn't me who opened it. I hadn't touched it since sunset. The lantern light flickered across a new line written at the bottom of the list. Not the original handwriting. This one was fresher, slanted. Rule number 7. If you hear digging when you're not digging, don't look. The words were still damp, like someone had just written them. My hand started to shake, because that was the sound I'd just heard. Someone digging. I stood there a long time, staring at that line, waiting for the sound to come back. But it didn't. Not that night. Still, I didn't sleep. I kept the lantern beside the door burning bright until dawn, watching the fog shift outside the window like it was alive. And just as the sun began to rise, that pale, ghostly blue that comes before morning, I heard something new. A voice. Low, close, almost a whisper. It said, "You're late." I spun toward the window, but there was no one there. Only a single footprint pressed in the mud outside, pointed toward the shed, not away from it. That's how my first night ended, with a fresh rule added to the notebook and a footprint that didn't belong to me. I told myself I'd finish the week, collect my pay, and move on. But deep down, I already knew the truth. You don't just work Pine Hollow Cemetery, you join it. I told myself it was just an animal, an armadillo maybe. Hell, maybe a drunk kid from the nearby trailer park, trying to scare the new guy. That's what I wanted to believe. But the sound came again, closer this time. 3 careful strikes, each one heavier than the last. The kind of rhythm that only comes from a person who knows what they're doing with a shovel. And it was coming from row 7. That's where the oldest graves are, the ones you can barely read anymore. Names worn off, dates faded by rain and moss. I grabbed my lantern and started walking. The fog was thicker than it had been earlier, swirling around my boots like smoke from a slow fire. The air smelled different there, not like the swamp. It had a sweetness to it, like turned soil or something just starting to rot. Each step crunched against gravel, soft and muffled. The sound stopped the moment I got close. I stood still, listening. Nothing. Then a voice. Soft. Female. Maybe young. It came from just ahead, past the 7th row, near where the fence dipped toward the bayou. It said, "Don't forget the light." I spun around, swinging the lantern through the mist. "Who's there?" No answer, just the low ripple of water somewhere beyond the fence. The flame inside the lantern shuddered once, dimmed, then steadied again. And that's when I saw it, a patch of soil that looked freshly turned. Darker than the rest. Damp, like someone had been working there not long ago. The grave marker beside it was too old to read. The stone leaned forward slightly. The letters smoothed down to shadows, but the dirt was soft, fresh. I crouched down and ran my glove across it. Still warm. Now, I've dug enough graves to know what fresh soil feels like. You can tell the difference between ground that's been sitting a while and ground that's just been disturbed. And this one, it was like someone had dug it recently and filled it back in. I shined the lantern closer. There were prints in the mud, bare footprints, small, like a child's. I stood up quick. My pulse kicked in my ears. The air went tight, like it was pressing down on me. That's when the lantern flickered again. 3 slow blinks. Same rhythm as the shovel strikes I'd heard earlier. Then everything went dead quiet. The silence in Pine Hollow isn't normal. It's not the peaceful kind. It's the kind that listens. I backed up slowly, keeping the lantern raised. My light caught something carved into the nearest tree trunk. 5 small scratches, close together, deep enough to show fresh wood beneath. At first, I thought it was animal marks. But the pattern, it looked deliberate, like tally marks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And below them, half covered by moss, a 6th one, newer. The voice came again, closer, almost beside me this time. "Don't forget the light." I turned so fast the lantern hit the air and hissed. There was no one there. No footprints leading away. But across the field, down near the far fence, one of the other lanterns had gone out. The flame that had been steady all night was gone, swallowed by fog. Only the empty glass catching my light in reflection. I didn't think. I just started running. When I reached it, the air around that lantern was freezing cold. Not swamp cool, not night chill, but wrong. Like the temperature dropped 10 degrees just for that corner of the yard. I relit it fast, my hands shaking so bad I nearly dropped the lighter. The flame burst to life, flickering hard for a moment, then steadying. And just like that, the silence lifted. Crickets started again, frogs croaking from the water. The whole world resumed like it had been paused. I stood there breathing hard, sweat running down my neck, trying to make sense of what just happened. But when I turned to head back to the shed, the dirt under that lantern caught my eye. Soft, newly turned, like someone had just been there digging. And pressed into the mud beside it, clear as day, was a small handprint. Back inside the shed, I set the lantern down and opened the notebook. It was already open to a new page I hadn't seen before. The handwriting was shaky, rushed. Rule number 8. When they remind you of the light, it means one's gone out. Relight it fast, before something else does. The ink was still wet, and there, at the bottom corner of the page, was another mark. A small, perfect print of a child's hand. I didn't sleep that night, didn't even sit down. I just watched those lanterns through the window, praying they'd all stay lit until dawn. Because by then, I'd stopped thinking this was a job. It was something else. Something that had chosen me the moment I clocked in. By the time I got back to the shed, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, not yet, but from something deeper. That kind of trembling you get when your instincts are screaming, but your brain's still pretending everything's fine. The shed door creaked as I pushed it open. The air inside was thick, still warm from the lantern heat. But the moment I stepped in, I knew something had changed. It was darker. Not completely dark, just wrong. You ever walk into a room and realize a light's missing before you even look? That kind of wrong. I turned and counted the glow outside through the window. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There were supposed to be 6. One was out. I stepped back out onto the porch and stared toward the far edge of the yard. Sure enough, the northwest lantern, the one closest to row 7, was dead. No flame. Just an empty glass globe catching the moonlight like a dull eye. At first, I figured it burned out. It happens. But when I reached it, the wick was still damp. The oil inside, untouched. No reason for it to have gone out. And yet, the metal frame was cold. Not cool from night air. Cold, like something had drawn the heat out of it. I relit it quick, my lighter flicking 3 times before it caught. When the flame came back, it sputtered, then steadied, small and tight, as if afraid to move. That's when I noticed it. The dirt beneath the lantern was disturbed, not dug up exactly, but shifted, like something had pressed against it from underneath. I went back to the shed fast. Every instinct told me not to look down as I walked. Inside, I sat on the edge of the chair and tried to steady my breathing. The air smelled like wet iron. My clothes clung to me, the kind of heat that feels like it's rising from the ground instead of falling from the air. I poured myself a bit of coffee from the thermos, hands still trembling, and that's when I saw it. The notebook. It was lying open again, dead center on the table, even though I knew I'd left it closed on the shelf. Pages fluttering, though the air was still. There was a new line written at the bottom of the list. Fresh ink, slightly smudged, like someone had written it in a hurry and shut the book too soon. Rule number 6. If a lantern goes out by itself, relight it fast. Someone's following the dark. I didn't remember seeing that before. I turned back to the earlier pages. It wasn't there. The numbering had even shifted, like the notebook was rewriting itself. I sat there staring at that sentence, my thumb pressed against the page just to make sure it was real. And the longer I looked, the more the words seemed to sink into the paper, as if the ink were alive, bleeding downward. Outside, the lanterns flickered, just once, all of them at the same time, every single one, then steadied again. I can't explain what that felt like. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was more like realization, like something out there wanted me to know it was aware of me now, that by relighting that flame, I'd been seen. I picked up the notebook and held it to my chest, like it was some kind of shield. That sounds ridiculous, I know, but that thing, that book, it wasn't just paper. It was protection. I flipped the page again, hoping maybe there'd be some clue about what someone's following the dark meant. There wasn't. Just a faint ring on the next page, a perfect circle of oil stain, the same size as the bottom of a lantern. And inside that ring, a fingerprint, not mine. Around midnight, the rain stopped. The frogs started again. The crickets too. The world seemed normal enough that for a minute, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it all. Then I caught something in the reflection of the lantern glass. Movement. Not behind me, not outside. Beneath me. Like a shadow crawling along the floorboards, long and slow, slipping under the table and out toward the door. I didn't move. Didn't even breathe. Just watched as the edge of the shadow brushed the lantern's base, and the flame inside wavered. Then the shadow disappeared. The flame steadied again. I stayed awake the rest of the night, lantern burning bright beside me. The notebook open in front of me like a map I hadn't learned to read yet. Every creak of the shed, every gust of wind brushing the door. I thought about that line. Someone's following the dark. And I realized something. Maybe the rules weren't about keeping me safe. Maybe they were about keeping them contained. Because the light didn't just push back the darkness. It kept it from moving. And that meant whatever followed it was still out there, waiting for another lantern to go out. It was a little past 2 in the morning when I saw her. I was sitting by the window of the shed, half dozing, the lantern light rocking against the glass. Outside, the fog had thickened so much it looked like the whole cemetery was underwater. The world was silent again. Not peaceful quiet, hollow quiet. The kind where even your heartbeat sounds too loud. And that's when I saw movement by the front gate. At first, I thought it was the wind. The fog has a way of making shapes, tall, thin, human-like if you stare long enough. But this one didn't sway or fade. It just stood there. I reached for my flashlight and leaned closer to the window. There, just beyond the gate, stood a woman, barefoot, wearing a hospital gown that clung to her skin, dripping with water like she'd just climbed out of the bayou. Her head was tilted slightly to the side, like she was listening for something. Her hair hung long and black, covering most of her face. I couldn't see her eyes, but I could feel her looking at me, the way the air goes still when someone's watching. The strange part was, she didn't move. Not a step, not a twitch. Just stood there. Hand raised slowly, palm open, like she wanted me to let her in. My stomach dropped. Because I remembered rule number 4, never, ever speak to anyone standing beyond the fence after midnight. That line had seemed ridiculous when I read it. Now it was the only thing between me and whatever was standing there. Every instinct screamed to help her, to call out, to ask if she was hurt. But another part of me, the part that had started believing those rules weren't jokes, told me not to say a word. So I didn't. I turned my back, slowly, carefully. Every nerve in me was tight, my skin prickling like static. I walked back toward the lantern, forcing myself not to look out the window again. Then, from behind me, a voice, soft, wet, close. It whispered, "You left the gate open last night." I froze. Her voice wasn't muffled by distance. It wasn't coming from the gate. It was inside the cemetery. I turned, every hair on my arm standing straight up. The gate was still closed, locked, just like I'd left it. But the woman was gone. Nothing stood by the fence, no footprints in the dirt, just the fog pressing against the bars like it wanted in. I stepped outside, my lantern shaking in my hand. The air was thick and heavy, and every sound, the crickets, the frogs, even my own boots, felt muffled, as if I'd walked underwater. I scanned the perimeter. No movement, no sign of anyone. But when I got closer to the gate, I noticed something that stopped me cold. The padlock, the same one I'd latched shut myself, was hanging open, unlocked. Now, I know what I saw earlier. I locked that gate before sundown. I remember hearing the click, but now it hung loose, swinging slightly on the hinge. I knelt down, examining the ground by the gate. There were no footprints outside, but inside, pressed into the wet mud, were 2 bare footprints, small, delicate, facing inward, like someone had already crossed the line. I backed away slowly, my breath fogging the air. The sound of water dripped somewhere behind me, faint but steady, like a trail. I followed it with the lantern, my hand trembling just enough to make the flame dance. The droplets led from the gate to one of the headstones by the main path. The stone was old, the kind with the name carved deep and the date nearly erased. But I could still make out the year, 1974, and the name, Claire B. Holloway. I didn't know who she was, didn't want to. But at the base of her grave, the soil was wet, not from rain, from something else. Water. Clear, cold, still dripping, as if someone had stood there minutes ago. I went back inside, locked the shed door, and slid the bolt shut. My heart was still hammering when I looked at the notebook again. It was lying open on the table, flipped to the same page I'd read the night before. Only now, under rule number 4, someone had written in small, faded handwriting, "She always comes back wet." I stared at it for a long time, listening to the faint drip against the window. And I realized something. That whisper she'd said wasn't just a warning. It was a reminder. "You left the gate open last night." But I hadn't. I'd never worked a night before, which means whoever she was talking to, it wasn't me. It was whoever had this job before me, the one who didn't make it long enough to close the gate. The sun came up gray that morning, not bright, not warm, just a flat, colorless light that made everything look dead. The kind of morning that feels like it's pretending to be safe. I didn't sleep. I sat there in that shed till dawn, watching the fog lift off the graves like steam. By the time I saw the road again, I knew I needed answers. So, after clocking out, I drove straight to the county office. It was one of those old municipal buildings, the kind that still smelled like typewriter ink and floor polish. Ceiling fans spinning slow, a faded flag in the corner. The woman behind the desk looked like she'd been there since the building was built. Half-moon glasses, hair in a tight gray bun, fingers stained with ink. "Morning," I said, trying to sound casual. I'm the new night keeper over at Pine Hollow Cemetery. She froze. Didn't even finish typing. Just looked up over the rim of her glasses. Where? She asked. Pine Hollow, I said again. Out off County Road 14. I started this week. That was when her expression changed. Slow and strange. Like she was looking at something she thought she'd never see again. She pushed her chair back and stood up, moving toward an old filing cabinet in the corner. Each drawer was labeled by decade. She went straight for the one marked 1980, 1999. Why are you working out there? She asked, not looking at me. County hired me, I said. Maintenance, night shift, gravekeeping. The drawer screeched as she opened it. She flipped through the files, the paper whispering like dry leaves. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. That cemetery's been closed for years? I laughed. No, ma'am, it's still active. I've got paperwork, keys. There's a man named Clyde who... She stopped flipping. Looked at me then. Her eyes were pale, sharp, unblinking. Son, she said, nobody's been hired out there since Clyde quit in 1998. For a moment, the room felt too small. The air went heavy, like I'd just walked into the shed again. Maybe they reopened it, I said, even though I didn't believe it. I mean, it's maintained. Fresh graves, working lights. She shook her head. Pine Hollow was shut down after the flood back in '98. The storm washed half the grounds away. Unearthed bodies, coffins, headstones. The county couldn't afford to fix it. She turned another page, then added quietly, after that, no one would take the job, not after what happened to Clyde. I asked her what did happen to him. She hesitated, glanced toward the door, then back at me. Officially, he quit. Left in the middle of his shift. Left the gates open too. She lowered her voice. But some say he didn't quit. Said he drowned, even though the floodwaters never reached that far. I didn't know what to say, because I'd seen her. The woman in the gown. The one who whispered you left the gate open last night. And now I was starting to think she hadn't been talking to me at all. The clerk must have seen something on my face, because her tone softened. She stepped closer, resting one hand on the counter. Do yourself a favor, son, she said. If you're really working out there, don't go past the 7th row. That ground doesn't stay still. I swallowed hard. What do you mean? She looked at me for a long moment, and then, with a sigh, she slid an old folder across the counter. It was labeled in faded ink, Pine Hollow, Incident Report, 1998. I flipped it open. Inside was a single photograph. Grainy, taken in the dark, but clear enough to make my stomach turn. It showed the front gate of Pine Hollow, hanging open, half submerged in water. And standing just inside it was a man with a lantern. The light caught his face just enough to show the features. Thin, wiry, gray hair slicked back. Clyde. The same man who handed me the notebook 3 nights ago. I left the building in silence. Didn't thank her. Didn't say goodbye. I just walked out into the parking lot, stood there staring at my truck, and tried to breathe. Because there's something no one tells you about finding the truth. It doesn't free you. It traps you deeper. I started that truck and looked back down the road, the same one that led straight back to Pine Hollow. And for the first time, I didn't want to go back. But part of me already knew I would. Because whatever's buried out there isn't finished. And neither am I. I shouldn't have gone back that night. Every part of me knew it. But there's something about Pine Hollow. Once you've seen it, once you've worked it, it gets under your skin. It doesn't let you go. The drive back was quiet. No music, no talk radio. Just the hum of the tires and the weight of what that county clerk had told me. That the cemetery was shut down. That Clyde had been gone for over 20 years. But I'd seen him. I'd talked to him. And the notebook he gave me was still sitting on the passenger seat beside me. I kept telling myself there had to be some mix-up, some rational explanation. Maybe the old man had a son, or a brother, or maybe the county was just wrong. That's what I told myself. Right up until I reached the gate. It was wide open. The chains hung loose, swaying just slightly, even though there was no wind. And beyond the gate, the fog glowed faintly, because every lantern in that cemetery was already burning. All 6 of them. Now, I hadn't lit a single one since the night before. I left them cold and empty, but there they were, flames steady, each one throwing off that same dull amber light that made the fog shimmer like glass. For a moment, I thought maybe the day crew had come by, but there was no day crew. There hadn't been one in decades. As I stepped through the gate, the air hit me different, heavy, wet. The kind of wet that doesn't come from rain, more like the air itself was sweating. I called out, "Clyde!" My voice echoed through the fog, dull and warped, bouncing back wrong. Then I saw him. He was standing beside the shed, same old overalls, same miner's headlamp, same stance, except something about him wasn't right. His skin was pale, not sick pale, but waterlogged, like he'd been soaking in a river. His clothes hung heavy, dripping dark streaks down onto the dirt. And his eyes, they looked clear, too clear, like the water had washed something out of him. He raised a hand and pointed to the ground in front of him. His voice came out low, bubbling like it was rising through water. "You forgot rule number 7. I froze. My brain scrambled to remember what rule 7 even was. The last one I'd written down was about the lanterns. After that, nothing. But as he said it, I felt the notebook in my pocket grow warm, hot even. I pulled it out, flipped it open, and there it was, written across the bottom of the page in thick black ink that hadn't been there before. Rule number 7. If you ever see me again after dawn, it isn't me. I looked up. He was still there, watching me, still pointing. "Clyde," I said quietly, "what are you?" Before I could finish, the ground beneath him shifted. The dirt rippled, not like something moving under it, but like the earth itself had turned to liquid. He didn't fight it, didn't reach for me, just kept staring as his boots sank slowly into the soil. First the ankles, then the knees, then his chest. When the dirt reached his mouth, his headlamp flickered once, twice, and went dark. Then the earth closed over him, smooth as if he'd never been there at all. I stood there frozen, my light shaking in my hand, watching the last few bubbles of air rise up through the mud. Then, as the final one popped, I heard a sound I'll never forget. A single, quiet click. It came from the shed. I turned and saw the notebook lying on the porch railing again, open to a new page. My handwriting scrawled in my own pen, but I hadn't written it. Rule number 8. Never follow him, not even to help. The ground remembers its own. The lantern beside the shed flickered, then another one, and another, each one dimming for a heartbeat before coming back to life. And in that flicker, for the briefest second, I saw shadows. Not people, not quite, standing in the fog between the rows, watching. They weren't moving toward me. They didn't need to. They were already here. That's when I understood. The rules weren't written to protect the living. They were written to keep the dead where they belong. Clyde didn't quit. He never left. He just became part of the place, part of the cycle that keeps the lights burning and the gates locked. And now, standing there under that colorless Florida sky, I realized something else. He hadn't warned me to stay away. He'd handed me the job. The moment Clyde vanished, I locked the gate. Didn't think, just did it. Chain wrapped twice, padlock snapped tight. I wasn't taking any chances. The air felt different after that, heavy, still, and charged, like the world was waiting for something to happen. The fog had started to lift, but the night didn't feel any lighter. It felt suspended. Like time itself had decided to stay a while. I told myself if I could just make it to sunrise, I'd leave. I'd drive until I ran out of gas, throw that notebook in a ditch, and never say the word Pine Hollow again. But the thing about that place, it doesn't let you plan your escape. So I did what any man with too much fear and too little sense would do. I walked the perimeter, Every few minutes, I'd hear it again. That same sound of a shovel hitting dirt. Slow, steady, patient, thud, thud, thud. I tried not to follow it. The rules said not to, but the sound was everywhere. It echoed inside my chest, under my feet, behind my ears. By the third hour, I realized it wasn't echoing. It was circling me. The lanterns burned low but steady. Each one flickered now and then, a tiny tremor of light that made my pulse jump every time. But not one of them went out. I made sure of that. I checked every single one, touching the glass, whispering under my breath like it might help. At some point, the mist began to move in slow spirals across the ground. It didn't drift. It turned, like something was stirring beneath the soil, and the air above it was spinning in response. Every step I took felt like it echoed inside the earth, like the ground knew I was walking on it and wanted to remember me for later. Around 4 in the morning, I found myself back at the spot where Clyde had been standing. The same patch of ground where he'd pointed, where the dirt swallowed him whole. Only now, it was smooth. Not a mound, not a hole, just untouched earth, flat and clean, like the ground had been pressed by a giant hand. No sign of Clyde, no footprints, no nothing. But the lantern nearest him burned brighter than the rest, taller, sharper, almost white. The glass hissed faintly, fogging on the inside like it was breathing. I stared at it for a long time before I noticed something carved into the post beside it. 3 words etched deep into the wood. Keep them burning. By 5, the shovel sounds had slowed. The wind picked up, cold and sharp, and for the first time in hours, I could hear the swamp again. Frogs, crickets, a lone owl in the distance. Life, or something pretending to be it. The horizon started bleeding pale light. Dawn coming. I almost cried when I saw it, but right before the sun touched the trees, I heard something small fall onto the porch behind me. A soft thud. I turned. There it was, the notebook, lying open, like it had been waiting for me. I walked back slowly, the gravel crunching under my boots. When I picked it up, a chill ran straight through me, like the pages had been sitting in cold water all night. The ink had smeared, but I could still read the words written across the bottom of the last page. Rule number 8. Once you take the night shift, you never really leave. The handwriting was mine. I swear to God, it was mine. Same slant, same pressure, same ink pen I kept in my pocket. But I hadn't written it. I couldn't have. Because while I was out walking that perimeter, that notebook wasn't even with me. The lantern started to dim as the first rays of sun hit the graves. The fog began to rise again, retreating toward the bayou. I stood there watching the cemetery in daylight for the first time since I'd started. And I noticed something I'd missed before. Every gravestone in row 7 was marked with the same small symbol, a circle with a line through it. And carved underneath each name, barely visible unless the light hit just right, was one word: Keeper. The realization came slow, like the morning light itself. Maybe Clyde hadn't been the only one. Maybe no one ever really quit Pine Hollow. Maybe we all just moved deeper into it. Because that's what the job really is. Not digging, not watching over the dead. It's becoming part of the place that keeps them quiet. And when I looked down at that notebook again, the last bit of writing was changing. Ink bleeding, letters shifting. The words rearranged themselves until they spelled something new. Rule number 9. The light keeps them in. The keeper keeps the light. And that's when I understood I hadn't taken the night shift. The night shift had taken me. I still work here. I don't clock in anymore. There's no one left to pay me, no payroll, no records, no county oversight. But every night when the sun slips behind those black cypress trees, the lanterns light themselves. One by one, 6 small flares pushing back the dark, breathing in rhythm like the cemetery itself is alive. And maybe it is. At first, I used to wait for sunrise. Now, I don't even notice when it comes. The days blend together, light, dark, fog, silence. It's all the same. The only thing that keeps time here are the lanterns. When they burn, the world feels still. When they flicker, I know something's moving beneath the soil. Sometimes I hear voices near the fence. Travelers, lost folks, kids from town daring each other to peek through the gate. They never stay long. The brave ones come close enough to see the glow through the trees, to hear the faint hum that rolls through the air like distant thunder. But they never see me. Not unless I want them to. The first few nights after Clyde disappeared, I tried to leave. I packed up the notebook, locked the gate, and drove until the fog finally cleared. But somehow, I ended up right back here. Same dirt road, same rusted gate, same 6 lights burning in the dark. It's like Pine Hollow isn't in Florida anymore. It's somewhere else, somewhere that only exists when the sun goes down and the living stop looking for it. The notebook's thicker now. New pages, new rules. Each one written by my own hand, though half the time, I don't remember writing them. The last one Clyde left still sits near the top. Once you take the night shift, you never really leave. He was right, but I've added a few of my own over time. They come to me in moments, little whispers when the fog gets too close, or when I see movement near the gate that shouldn't be there. And the latest one, that one's important. Rule number 9. If you ever find yourself on County Road 14 after dark and see a light through the trees, don't stop. That's not a cemetery. That's Pine Hollow calling for its next keeper, because that's how it happens. That's how it's always happened. Somebody curious, somebody tired, somebody who needs a quiet job and a steady paycheck. They take the offer, just like I did. They drive too far down a road that shouldn't exist, find a gate that shouldn't open, and meet a man who shouldn't still be alive. And before they realize what's happened, they're holding the notebook. There's peace here, I guess. A kind of quiet you don't get in the world beyond the fence, but it's a lonely peace. The kind that hums beneath your skin, like static before a storm. The dead don't talk much, but they remember you. Sometimes, when the fog's heavy, I hear my name whispered from under the ground. Not angry, not cruel, just aware. And I whisper back, stay where you are. Then I light the lanterns again. The notebook lies open on the porch, waiting for the next hand to find it. The pages turn on their own now, fluttering gently in the night air. Some nights I think I see shapes moving down the road. Headlights that blink out halfway here, engines that never reach the gate. Maybe they get lost. Maybe they turn around. Or maybe Pine Hollow just hasn't chosen them yet. I used to think this was a job. Now I know it's something else, something older than work, older than paychecks or names or towns that remember your address. It's a keeping, a passing down. And when my time finally ends, when the last lantern burns out, I know the ground will smooth itself again. The notebook will find a new hand, and the rules will start all over. Because Pine Hollow doesn't rest, it just waits. Soft pause, almost a whisper. If you're ever driving through northern Florida, and the fog gets thick, and you see a flicker of light just off County Road 14, don't stop, don't look, don't listen. Because that's not a lantern, it's a welcome, and Pine Hollow's already found its next keeper.